Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. It has been more than 4 years since the Taliban came to power. It was hoped that the Taliban would transform and evolve into a responsible governing entity and lead the country into a new era of peace and prosperity with good neighborliness and adherence to international obligations. As an immediate neighbor, in order to secure a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, Pakistan regularly facilitated dialogue and engagement with the Taliban authorities. Last year, for example, we had a series of high-level visits to Kabul, presenting a number of initiatives assisting in humanitarian relief efforts, offering bilateral trade incentives, liberalized visa regime, transit concessions, and participating in regional platforms to help Afghanistan integrate with the region and beyond. And to recall here that to facilitate direct dialogue, the international community had also extended an olive branch to the Taliban during the Doha III process with the expectation that they would deliver on 3 key international demands, that is, counterterrorism, human rights, and inclusive governance. And I think it's clear from today's discussion also, regrettably, they have failed to deliver on all 3 counts. Madam President, today Afghanistan is a sanctuary for terrorist groups and proxies, a reality acknowledged by global assessments, including UN reports and UN monitoring team. This has destabilized the region with dire consequences and security challenges for its immediate neighbors, particularly Pakistan. Terrorism emanating from Afghan soil poses a grave threat not only to its immediate neighbors, but also to the broader region and beyond, undermining regional and international peace and security. Terrorist entities including TTP, BLA, and its Majid Brigade, ISIL-K, Al-Qaeda, and ETIM enjoy safe havens inside Afghanistan, from where they launch cross-border infiltration, violent attacks, and suicide bombings. Elements within the Taliban regime have chosen the path of complicity and active support of these groups, with external backing and sponsorship of our eastern neighbor, a known opportunist and spoiler, providing logistical support and financing to wage a proxy war against Pakistan. Pakistan has since witnessed a surge in terrorist attacks, planned, financed, and orchestrated from Afghan soil under the Taliban regime's direct watch. We have lost thousands of lives to terrorism-related incidents since the Taliban takeover. And just last month, more than 175 innocent Pakistani lives were lost, including in 3 suicide attacks. We would like to warn that spillover effects of the terrorism nurturing in Afghanistan will not remain confined to Pakistan. Madam President, Pakistan has always prioritized dialogue. Numerous diplomatic efforts were made to counsel the Taliban and to convey our concerns. Recent mediation efforts facilitated by the sincere support of brotherly countries, particularly Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, also have not yielded the desired results. The Taliban's continued failure to undertake substantive action, their rigid reluctance to provide assurances and guarantees, and refusal of their leadership to publicly denounce and condemn terrorist groups such as the TTP and BLA highlights the scale of their complicity and active support. Terrorist groups are collaborating through joint training, illicit weapons acquisition, and coordinating attacks. But Pakistan will not sit idle while suffering from terrorist acts from across the Afghan border that target our border posts, law enforcement agencies, and civilian infrastructure, including public spaces of worship and schools. We have confiscated large caches of sophisticated military grade modern equipment left behind by foreign forces in Afghanistan during our counterterrorism operations. Madam President, after showing maximum restraint, on 21st and 22nd of February, Pakistan carried out intelligence-based selective targeting of 7 terrorist camps and hideouts belonging to the TTP and its affiliates and the ISIL-K and the bordering regions with precision and accuracy. But on 26th February, the Taliban publicly declared their decision to initiate hostilities against Pakistan across multiple border locations with unprovoked firing and shelling of border posts and military installations. In exercise of its right to self-defense, Pakistan took retaliatory measures against hostile targets and logistical bases used by terrorist groups. Our actions have been proportional, based on careful planning with necessary due diligence and directed solely against identified terrorist camps and support bases. Pakistan will take all necessary defensive measures for the protection of its citizens, territory, and sovereignty. Our counterterrorism operations will continue for as long as it takes to degrade the combat capabilities of terrorist groups and support infrastructure. While UNAMA mentions the reported civilian casualties during cross-border clashes, it has not presented a realistic overview of Afghanistan's security dynamics and efforts to prevent illicit trade and destabilizing accumulation of small arms and light weapons and their diversion in Afghanistan and the region, as mandated by the Council. The presence of terrorist entities in Afghanistan cannot be delinked from the security situation. UNAMA's ability to accurately verify incidents of border clashes and reports of civilian casualties in an environment where access to areas outside Kabul is restricted and strictly monitored by the Taliban poses serious questions of credibility. Madam President, ordinary and vulnerable Afghans are suffering from Taliban's inhumane restrictions and misplaced priorities. Sanctions, a dysfunctional banking system, drying up foreign aid, poverty, terrorism, narcotics, and human rights violations weigh heavily on Afghanistan's socio-economic landscape, a direct result of Taliban's reckless behavior. Continued restrictions on women and girls inside Afghanistan are inconsistent with Islamic traditions and norms of Muslim society. Pakistan fully shares the international community's concerns on human rights and the discriminatory treatment of women and girls. Increasing financing gaps in humanitarian needs and response plan for 2026, requiring $1.71 billion for basic needs, demonstrates lack of support for a regime that is willing to sacrifice the welfare of its people for its own flawed policies. Madam President, for over 4 decades, Pakistan welcomed millions of Afghan refugees despite constraints and inadequate international support, coping with the huge caseloads of illegal Afghans without documentation, posing a serious threat to our security. These were not meant to be indefinite stays. While we continue to extend all possible facilitation, the international community must shoulder its responsibility, share this burden, and uphold commitments which have been long delayed, unkept, and at times reversed. Shifting the blame of Afghanistan's woes to the inflow of returnees does not reflect ground realities either. Madam President, Pakistan has consistently advocated for sustained engagement with Afghanistan. We look forward to the next steps of the UN-led Doha process and action plan for its mosaic approach to address Afghanistan's multifaceted challenges comprehensively with well-defined objectives and a realistic roadmap as the only viable pathway to lasting peace in Afghanistan. Without reciprocity from the Afghan Taliban regime, we fear that we go nowhere. As immediate neighbors bound by geography with deep-rooted ties, cultural linkages, and fraternal bonds, no country desires peace and stability in Afghanistan more than Pakistan. And no country has suffered more from the consequences of decades of conflict and instability in Afghanistan than Pakistan. We wish to see a peaceful, stable, interconnected, and prosperous Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, a point also highlighted by the Deputy SRSG. Pakistan's demand from Afghanistan has always been singular and clear: verifiable and non-reversible action against terrorists. This demand remains unmet to date. The Taliban must first and foremost ensure that their territory is not used for terrorism against neighboring countries and take demonstrable steps to deny space to terrorist groups and proxies. I thank you.
Madam President, let me begin by congratulating you on assuming the presidency of the Council and for your leadership during the month of March. I also thank you for convening this important meeting on the situation in Afghanistan. We also appreciate the strong joint press statement issued prior to this meeting. I'm grateful to the DSRSG, Madam Ghanyan, for her detailed briefing. I thank the previous speakers for reaffirming their support for the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls. Madam President, yesterday marked the International Women's Day, an important moment to reflect on the challenges faced by millions of women around the world. I wish to pay tribute to the courage and determination of all women, especially the women of Afghanistan, who are engaged in a historic struggle for freedom, justice, and lasting peace. The most meaningful way to honor their commitment and sacrifice is to support their efforts to reclaim their rightful place in society and in the international community. Madam President, in five months, it will mark 5 years since the Taliban imposed their rule in Afghanistan. It is now evident to the international community and to this Council that during this period, the Taliban have taken no meaningful steps toward change, moderation, or engagement with the realities and needs of the people of Afghanistan. On the contrary, their policies have grown increasingly rigid, exclusionary, and repressive. Afghanistan continues to face a profound social, humanitarian, economic, and political crisis, a crisis that is the direct result of Taliban's policies and governance based on repression and intimidation. The systematic deprivation of women and girls of their fundamental rights and freedoms, the dismantling of inclusive institutions, widespread human rights violations, targeted killings of former security forces and civilians accused of armed opposition, rising poverty, and deepening despair have collectively pushed Afghanistan toward isolation and toward the brink. Women and girls have effectively been erased from public life. Civic space has collapsed. Economic structures have deteriorated dramatically. An entire generation is being denied education and opportunity. These, Madam President, are not unintended consequences. They are the foreseeable results of deliberate policy choices. The United Nations, international partners, and donor countries have played a crucial role in preventing a large-scale humanitarian catastrophe, and we express our sincere appreciation despite the many challenges and impediments. However, humanitarian assistance is not a sustainable solution. It cannot substitute for political legitimacy, responsible governance, or sustainable economic recovery. The recent decline in humanitarian funding against a backdrop of persistent and growing needs is deeply alarming. Madam President, the Taliban, who were themselves a primary driver of instability over the past 2 decades, now speak of bringing security and stability, yet their actions tell a very different story. A nation has effectively been pushed into isolation and taken hostage by a male-dominated group, ruling through coercion, centralized authority, and distorted interpretation of Islam against the will of the Afghan people. The proliferation of radical madrasas, the suppression of inclusive education, the consolidation of power through repression, kidnapping, and hostage-taking of Afghan and international citizens, and the continued links with the presence of international terrorist groups on Afghanistan soil are creating dangerous conditions for insecurity and instability in Afghanistan, in the region, and beyond. Contrary to the commitments made under the Doha Agreement, the Taliban have provided a permissive environment for international terrorist groups. This was once again confirmed in the 2016 report of the Security Council Sanctions Monitoring Team. This endangers, first and foremost, the people of Afghanistan and poses a serious threat to regional and international security. We are already witnessing the dangerous spillover of these dynamics. The continued Pakistani airstrikes since 22 February have resulted in civilian casualties and escalating tensions with exchanges of artillery, drones, and ground assaults. According to UNAMA, as of 7 March, there has been at least 187 civilian casualties, 55% of whom were women and children. Such actions are unacceptable and must come to an immediate halt. Let me be clear, just as the Taliban do not represent Afghanistan, its people, its culture, or its authentic Islamic values, the violence arising from their policies, including the harboring of terrorist groups, does not represent the will of Afghan nation. As we stated in our official complaint submitted to this Council on 22 February, we call on this Council to address this aggression and urge Pakistan to immediately cease strikes against civilian areas and vital infrastructure in Afghanistan, including facilities representing 2 decades of investment by the Afghan people and international partners. Such actions constitute a violation of territorial integrity and the principles of United Nations Charter, international law, and norms of good neighborly relations. We unequivocally condemn terrorism in all its forms, including its instrumentalization, sponsorship, and the provision of safe havens. Terrorism is our common enemy. Counterterrorism must be genuine, non-selective, and grounded in a comprehensive strategy consistent with international law. The Afghan people have suffered from terrorism for decades and must not once again become victim of irresponsible and politicized policies and proxy wars. Combating terrorism in Afghanistan can only be achieved through a responsible, legitimate, and inclusive government, one that reflects the will of the Afghan people and honors Afghanistan's international obligations. Madam President, after 5 years, the status quo in Afghanistan is neither acceptable nor sustainable. Efforts under so-called pragmatic engagement to normalize or accommodate this reality will not bring peace, stability, or prosperity. What is needed now is a renewed and coordinated international engagement under the leadership of the United Nations with the support of this Council to facilitate the emergence of a legitimate and inclusive political and constitutional order grounded in the will and aspirations of the Afghan people. Any essential engagement with the Taliban must remain principled and conditional, linked to measurable progress on human rights, inclusive governance, and counterterrorism. Accountability mechanisms, including the independent investigative mechanism in Geneva, and humanitarian and economic assistance to Afghan people must be supported. In this regard, the role of UNAMA remains essential. As we consider the renewal of its mandate, we express appreciation to the UNAMA team for their continued efforts and support the extension of its mandate. At the same time, a strong and effective mandate, together with the appointment of a capable, impartial, and dedicated special representative of Secretary General committed to human rights principles, will be critical to ensuring the balanced implementation of all three pillars of the mandate, including the political component. The Security Council has a central responsibility. What is required is a unified, principled, and coherent approach. Only through such an approach can we help create the conditions for emergence of a responsible, accountable, and inclusive government that respects the fundamental rights of all Afghans, including women and girls, and fulfills Afghanistan's international obligations. Madam President, allow me to conclude by outlining what the people of Afghanistan seek. They seek a country where every child can go to school. They seek a system where women can work, learn, and live with dignity. They seek accountability for those who torture, execute, and oppress, not impunity. They seek counterterrorism measures that are principled and lawful, not selective and politicized. They seek governance that reflects Afghanistan's diversity, not one that excludes. These are aspirations of Afghan people. These are universal rights. These are the commitments Afghanistan accepted when it joined this organization in November 14, 1946. We committed ourselves to faith in the fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women. And those commitments do not expire because the Taliban says so. The people of Afghanistan, who have endured decades of conflict and hardship, deserve peace, dignity, justice, and hope. Our collective responsibility is to stand with them and ensure that Afghanistan moves toward ensuring peace, stability, and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the
Madam President, I congratulate the United States for assuming the presidency of the Council and thank you for giving me the floor. I thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon, the Head of Mission and Deputy SRSG of UNAMA, for her briefing. India has deep-rooted and civilizational bonds with our contiguous neighbor Afghanistan. Our history of close ties keeps guiding us in the current context, a situation when the proud people of Afghanistan need the world's assistance. Over the years, India has continued to strongly advocate for peace and stability that could aid development in Afghanistan. Our participation in the Doha Working Group meetings underlines this commitment. Madam President, India prioritizes capacity building and humanitarian assistance initiatives for the Afghan people. With more than 500 development partnership projects spread across all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, we are deepening our engagement in healthcare, public infrastructure, and capacity building. We continue to work with UN agencies as well as with agencies such as the Afghanistan Red Cross Society in food security, healthcare, education, and sports. The visits of Afghan ministers last year are helping us ensure that this aid is reaching those who need it the most. Since the last briefing in December 2025, India has made significant progress in advancing healthcare support in Afghanistan. Development projects approved earlier, including the establishment of a thalassemia center, an oncology center, a trauma center, a modern diagnostic center, and the replacement of the heating system at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, and the construction of a 30-bed hospital, all in Kabul, as well as the construction of 5 maternity health clinics in Paktika, Khost, and Paktia, are progressing steadily. In the last 3 months, which is the reporting period for the UNSG's report, India delivered more than 1 million doses of immunization vaccines for children and 9.5 tons of anti-cancer medicine. In the coming months, we aim to deliver over 17 million additional doses of preventive vaccines to further strengthen Afghanistan's national immunization program. This is India's investment in the future of Afghanistan. Over the past 4.5 years, my country has supplied 50,000 tons of wheat, 380 tons of medicines and vaccines, and 40,000 liters of pesticides. Following the 2 earthquakes last year, India was among the first to provide humanitarian assistance to the tune of 60 tons of food items, 42 tons of earthquake relief materials, and 73 tons of essential medicines. In partnership with the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes, we have provided 68 tons of medical supplies and 32 tons of social support items for the rehabilitation of drug addicts. In the field of education, our scholarship and fellowship schemes for Afghan students are always in demand. Since 2023, around 3,000 students have availed themselves of these opportunities, including 1,000 Afghan women. India continues to provide financial and logistical support to Afghan self-help groups led by women. On the bright side, any visitor to Afghanistan today would see Afghan youth enthusiastically playing cricket. The Afghanistan cricket team has been winning hearts wherever they have been playing, and their spirit and passion in the just concluded Cricket World Cup was notable. My nation is proud to be part of their journey and happy to see them bring immense joy to the people of Afghanistan who are enduring so much. Madam President, we take note of the Secretary General's report on the situation in Afghanistan, especially the dire humanitarian concerns and the rising implications for the country due to unprecedented scale and pace of forced and involuntary returns under adverse circumstances. Acute food insecurity and climate and natural hazards have led to 45% of the population requiring humanitarian assistance this year, which is a dire situation that needs the world's attention. These significant vulnerabilities necessitate more efforts towards addressing food security, healthcare, water security, and other shelter challenges. The returnees need to be provided housing, basic services, and livelihoods. We add our voice to the Secretary General's call on member states to uphold their international obligations in relation to protection, including the principle of non-refoulement, and ensure that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified, and accompanied by sustained support for reintegration of returnees into communities. The Secretary General's report also expresses deep concern at civilian casualties caused by cross-border armed violence. We reiterate and support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring protection of civilians. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. It's hypocritical to espouse high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity on the one hand, while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that have killed 185 innocent civilians as of 6th March, around 55% of whom are women and children, and displaced over 100,000 according to the UNAMA on the other. We also reiterate a grave concern on the practice of trade and transit terrorism by denial of passage for trade and the cynical closure of access for a landlocked country. UN declarations on LLDCs sound hollow in the face of such actions. The trade and transit vulnerabilities of LLDCs should not be weaponized. This is a violation of WTO norms and of the UN Charter and international law. While we condemn these acts, we reaffirm our support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Afghanistan. Madam President, terrorism remains a global scourge afflicting humanity, and only coordinated efforts of the international community would ensure that ISIL and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and the proxies of LET such as the Resistance Front, along with those who facilitate their operations, no longer indulge in cross-border terrorism. Madam President, well over 4 years have passed since the political reality of Afghanistan has changed. India reiterates the importance of incentivizing positive actions. In this context, the current UN sanctions regime related to Afghanistan must take into account contemporary realities. We call on the United Nations and the international community to shun this business-as-usual approach and adopt nimble policy instruments that bring sustainable benefits for the Afghan people who have endured suffering for so long. India reiterates its commitment to strengthen our engagement with all stakeholders in bilateral, regional, and multilateral formats. India will always stand for the priorities and aspirations of Afghan society and will always support the people of Afghanistan. I thank you, Madam President.
Representative Pakistan has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I have been compelled to take the floor again after listening to remarks from the representatives of Afghanistan and India. Madam President, the so-called representative of Afghanistan, who in effect does not represent anyone but himself, must not abuse this forum to pursue his personal agenda. Sequestered in New York, Mr. Fike, my friend, is completely cut off from ground realities. And he chose to selectively comment on some aspects of the situation, particularly with reference to Pakistan. So therefore, the value and credibility of his remarks are in serious doubt. Pakistan's legitimate counter-terrorism operations are not directed against the brotherly people of Afghanistan and are only meant to neutralize the persistent threat of terrorism emanating from Afghan soil, and our actions are in full conformity with the right to self-defense and international humanitarian law. So it was not surprising that Mr. Fike had nothing to say about the cross-border terrorism from Afghanistan that is so heavily impacting Pakistan in terms of casualties among civilians, among our armed forces, law enforcement agencies, and infrastructure. And Madam President, given India's animosity towards Pakistan and the sole objective of its Afghan policy being to destabilize Pakistan, including by actively supporting and sponsoring terrorist groups operating from Afghan soil, such as TTP and BLA, the remarks of the Indian representative come as no surprise. India's representative deliberated at length on the security situation in Afghanistan. He mentioned civilian casualties and border clashes, but had not a word about the terrorist threat emanating from Afghanistan, which has targeted Pakistan and which many council members have highlighted in their statements. But there is a reason for that. It is India's complicity in all of this. We have provided irrefutable evidence of India's collusion with terrorist groups that are engaged in orchestrating violent attacks against Pakistan. One can sense India's pain in seeing its heavy investment in the Afghan terrorist franchise going to waste as a result of Pakistan's precise and effective action against terrorist camps and support bases inside Afghanistan. And the world needs no lectures from a serial violator of international law like India, a state that illegally occupies territory, violates UN Charter and Security Council resolutions, perpetrates state terrorism in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and beyond, systematically marginalizes its minorities, spreads hate, even weaponizes water with the express goal of starving Pakistan's population, and continues to use disinformation as a state policy. And the list goes on. So, Madam President, while India has always played the role of a spoiler in Afghanistan, Pakistan has engaged responsibly in promoting peace, stability, and prosperity in Afghanistan. But these goals can only be promoted if the Taliban regime fulfills its commitments with respect to counterterrorism, inclusive governance, and upholding the rights of Afghan women and girls. Three key areas that were highlighted by the council members in today's discussion. India in particular must cease and desist from its policy of stoking terrorism inside Pakistan from Afghan soil, now together with their newfound friends in the Taliban regime. While India has long played this dangerous game, we will not allow their sabotage and subversion from Afghan soil to nourish and harm Pakistan. Thank you.
Madam President, I could not have expected anything better from the esteemed representative of Pakistan. The laundry list that is regurgitated ad nauseum at every meeting of the Council and wastes the time of this august body is well known. I reiterate what I have said in my statement. India's assistance is directed at the friendly people of Afghanistan. What we have done in Afghanistan is known to the people of Afghanistan and to the international community. I need add no further comment. As far as problems in Pakistan are concerned, Pakistan would do well to look in the mirror and look at problems within rather than blame my country for what it faces. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to react and use the right of reply to the remarks made by my dear friend, Ambassador Ahmad. I just wanted to echo that the current status quo in Afghanistan is one of the wrong policies of our neighboring countries, particularly those who provided the same groups and supported them in the past 2 decades. And we hope that the current situation can be a good opportunity to learn from the past experiences and correct the policies. And we have to fight and combat the terrorism without any distinction. And we have condemned in our statement that terrorism is the common enemy, and we should always fight against terrorism without any distinction. And terrorist groups are all the same. The situation in Afghanistan today, we share the sufferings of our neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan and the people of Pakistan. But over the past 2 decades, the Afghan people have also suffered the same situation. Every day with suicide attacks, with bomb attacks, with civilians were targeted with the same terrorist group. And we have always been asking the Council, and we have been always condemning the terrorism and asking our neighboring countries to fight against terrorism without any distinction. So that is something that we wanted to share, and we are hopeful that the current situation can really provide an opportunity for creating a legitimate government, a government that's committed to international obligations and also to the protection of the rights of Afghan people, and can help create a state that Afghan people can live in peace with itself and also with its neighboring countries. Thank you.